Welcome, friends and fellow passionate entrepreneurial teachers. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you another friend that I have discovered through the world of Zettelkasten. Mel Jeffcoat is joining me today to share his entrepreneurial teaching journey. And Mel is a building preservation specialist and has a wonderful newsletter entitled Industrial Alchemy, where he explores transformation, which is the really interesting topic that I'm looking forward to talking about today. So, as a quick framing question for our audience, Mel, what do you love to teach and to share with others?
Well, Stephanie, the thing that I most love to teach and share is uh, the little tidbits of knowledge and learning that I get from things that people don't typically look at. Like, I like to read old books that are often forgotten. I live in an industrial town in the Rust Belt that has sort of been forgotten by the wider world. And I like to restore historic houses, which again, they've been neglected for many years and forgotten, but there is value in all of these things. And so, what I love to do is find the value and bring it out for other people to see and understand and, learn from and inspire them.
Beautiful. And how did you end up here? How did you end up restoring old houses and just where you are today with all of the things that you're developing?
Well, that's a very long story, but I will get just the basics of it. Moved to Ohio a long time ago, like 17 years ago, and bought an old house because that's what I could afford. And over the years, I had noticed that there was a local college program for building restoration, just really close by. And so when I finally, back in this would have been 2002, sorry, 2011. Boy, I don't know where that came from. 2011, I had the time, the money to jump into that program. And I started it just to learn how to fix the house that I was in, but it turned out to be a way to earn money. It turned out to be a career. So I worked for all of the local companies doing preservation. And I'm going to tell you a little story here about how I ended up leaving the last company and becoming a contractor for a few years. Um, so I was working for this guy who was a very good plasterer, and I was interested in plaster. And I had actually wanted to work for him for years because he had a good reputation. And he was very good, but he had no idea how to teach. Like he just did things. He didn't know how to break it down and teach somebody else. Really, the only way he knew how to teach was to demonstrate and then say, try it, and then maybe say, okay, you did this wrong, now try it again. And that's fine. I can learn that way. But the other problem with him was that he had too many projects. So he needed people who could work alone and be set up someplace, and he goes and works on something else, which is great if you know what you're doing, not so great if you're trying to learn. uh, so I'd been working for him for about a year, and there was this one project doing stucco on a porch. I didn't really know how to do stucco, but he kept saying, do it this way, and I'd try, and he'd come back at the end of the day and either say, that's bad, do it again, or okay, that's good, but you need to do it faster. But so I was frustrated already with this job. We had um, a lift that we had rented to be able to get up to the upper levels of this house, and this lift had problems. Like sometimes it would just stop working. There's controls up at the top and there's controls at the bottom, and sometimes the controls at the top would just stop. You wouldn't be able to do anything. You'd just be stuck. And working alone, that didn't work out too well. Um, And so that last day, he had the lift set up on one side of the house, and the ground was really soft over there. And the lift was actually leaning a little bit, which, you you can't do that. They have to be level. When you start going up high, you're gonna get overbalanced. But it was leaning away from the house and I was working towards the house. And I'm like, okay, I can work with this for a while. Um, and I'd called him and I said, this lift isn't right. I don't have any wood to prop it up. And he just basically told me, just deal with it. I don't have time to deal with this. Um, so I was doing as much work as I could. And it finally got to the point where I needed to move further away. And it felt wrong. And there was actually a voice in my head just before I was going to start moving it that said, today's the day that you die. And I said, I don't like that. And so I sort of sat there for a while. And I'm like, well, I'm supposed to keep working here, but I really don't want to fall over and die or get maimed. So um, I came down. I was able to maneuver the thing a little bit and get it so it was a bit more level. But I didn't trust myself at that point to be able to be sure that it was good. And I knew that a former instructor of mine lived in the neighborhood and had that day off from work. It was a Friday. So I gave him a call. He was able to come over and I'm like, just take a look at this thing and tell me if I've gotten it level enough and if I'm good to go. And he came over and he said, yeah, I think you've got it. You're fine. Um, and then the controls stopped working at the top. And he's like, oh, would you want me to take control and get you down? And I said, I got to finish this work. If you could just get me into place, into position, I'll do the work. And if the controls still don't work, I'll call my boss and have him get me down. I got to get this work done. And so he's maneuvering me up into position. And guess who shows up? The boss shows up. And he's angry that there's somebody else there. And of course, my friend just like, oh, hey, I just stopped by to check, and he just left right away. But the controls were still set for the bottom, so there was no denying that he had been helping me. And the boss was so mad about this, he fired me on the spot. And to be honest, it was the best firing ever. I was so happy to be alive, right? And it was a bad job. I was glad to be done with it. And the thing about those sorts of voices, I've had these moments in the past where I just suddenly knew something, and it turned out to be true. It's intuition or something. And the thing about those things is, even as you reflect on them further, they still are true. Like, okay, I didn't physically die that day, because I made some choices not to. But in a way, who I was, the person who followed the rules and did what I was told rather than what I needed to do, that person in a way died that day. And in the following months, I worked as a contractor to get some money. I was doing the work on my own, but I really started to do things that I wanted to do and that I had been too scared to do in the past. And that has led me to where I am today.
That is a fascinating story. I have multiple things I want to follow up on there. I mean, we see it a lot in the martial arts too. Like teaching is its own independent skill. Just because you're a master of one thing doesn't mean that you're good at then sharing it with other people. That's its own thing. And then the juxtaposition of those two mentors, mentors is a big word, but those two teachers where you had someone that was there and willing to support and listen to you, and then the other person that's just like, no, just get it done. It's kind of the difference between an instructor and a teacher. The instructor just tells you do the thing, just trust me and do what I tell you to do, and then the teacher, adapts with you. But my next question was going to be, what made you decide to carve your own path and kind of go your own entrepreneurial way? And I think that story kind of answers the question. Are there any other moments like throughout your journey where you thought about doing your own thing, or was that the defining moment that made you decide and go be independent?
Well, there have been other moments because, there was something that you said in your podcast, which when you said it, I just stopped and said, "Oh my goodness, this is so true." You said, uh, entrepreneurial doesn't mean necessarily being a small business owner because a lot of them just own a job. That is so true. When I was a contractor, I owned a job. And I had, instead of having one boss, I had every client was a boss. So that really, I thought that was what I wanted, but it wasn't. Um, so, for the last 5 years or so, I've been working for other people. I've been an employee, but I've also been building up my writing and my teaching and working towards being, well, as you put it, an entrepreneurial teacher. I wouldn't have used those words before you said them, but they make sense, and it does fit. So um, I think honestly, it was Scott Scheffer with his Antinet, his Zettelkasten, that really gave me the push in this direction. But the raw materials were there, had been simmering away for many years. He just sort of coalesced it.
So what is the work that you're doing currently? What are your dreams and goals for what you're building entrepreneurially through your Zettelkasten and through all of the stuff? Because the stuff that Scott Shepard is teaching us is not just how to write on index cards. It goes a lot farther than that in terms of, the marketing and basically building a business online that's analog based, which is always a fun juxtaposition. But what are your goals? What are you building?
Um, I want to build a tribe of people who are interested in thinking, really thinking about their own thoughts. And whew, I guess systems thinkers are also what I'm interested in because that's how I see the world, in systems and the way that the systems interplay with each other. And so when I'm looking back at old books and old buildings and things like that, they're another way of looking at the world that's different from the way that's popular right now. And if you come around to a different vantage point, then you see something different. And I think that uh, being able to share these things that I learn from these unusual sources is a way to help people think and maybe come to different conclusions about the world because they have different inputs. And so I'm very interested in people who are willing to really mull over and think about all sorts of weird different things.
I love that. And that was a really interesting answer because I also know that you're into art and you are artistic, and a lot of the work that you do restoring old houses, even the way you talk about it, feels artistic. And then you just did, I'm gonna forget what it was called. It was like plein air or something like that. The painting out in nature. There was a whole event you just did. So I found it interesting that your answer was very left brain systems oriented, but then I know that a lot of the work you do gets expressed in a very right brain artistic way. I don't know what my question is there, but I'm curious what your response is to what I just said.
Well, it's true. I think a large part of my life is figuring out how to find the right connections between those left brain and the right brain ways of thinking, because I do have very strong tendencies in both directions. And so I guess the way is, how do you harmonize that without being like bipolar or schizophrenic or something? Um, it's it's an ongoing process. Um, so it's the conflict between chaos and order. You can't have all of just one or the other. You have to have a mix, but finding the right mix is the trick and the difficult thing. So that's definitely part of the journey.
And I think when you find that balance, that's what starts to lead to transformation, which is the really interesting topic that you're into. And speaking of all the old stuff, where did the love of that come from? Is that something that's always been there, or was it literally just moving into this house that kind of sparked this passion for exploring old things?
It's always been there because I think the reason is because have always been a voracious reader and I read very quickly, especially when I was a kid. And we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor when I was a kid. And so my parents couldn't keep me in books. I mean, buying new books was a very rare thing. So I got whatever library discards, yard sale, whatever, anything that looked at all interesting, they'd throw my way. And I had this bookshelf full of things, from the 1800s and early 1900s. Some of them were more modern. I mean, I was a kid in the mid 80s. So, uh, obviously nothing past then, but the newer books were a pretty small part of my library. And because I read so quickly and I loved reading so much, I read them over and over and over again. And so I developed the ability to read the older books because a lot of times they are written in a more difficult or unfamiliar way compared to the newer books. But I developed the ability to read them very early because that's what I had. And so I've always had that interest. We also watched a lot of old movies. My dad was really into, we watched everything from, the early silent movies, and we watched a lot of the old uh, comedy duos and teams, the Marx Brothers, and the less well known ones like Wheeler and Woolsey, uh, which I loved them. They were great. So, there were a whole lot of old influences in my childhood. My dad loves to go metal detecting. We spent a lot of time, going out bottle hunting and trying to find interesting old things. There was actually there was an old dump that had been not used for decades. It was from I think maybe shut down in the 50s, and we would go there for fun. And it'd all been bulldozed over, and it wasn't gross or anything. And you could dig around in there and find old bottles and old figures, and I mean that's what we did for fun a lot of times, and it was great.
I love that. My dad definitely raised me the same way, making sure I saw the old stuff. Marx Brothers, we still watch those together. Yeah, that's awesome. So were there any of those books that were significantly impactful or that just kind of stand out from a nostalgia standpoint or anything that was transformational for you as you were growing up?
Ooh. Um, well, one that comes to mind, and I still actually have quite a few of these books, and some of them that got lost I've replaced over the years. But there was this one book that I found absolutely fascinating as a kid, and it was from I think the early 1900s was when it was published, but it was called Fortunes in Formulas, and it was a list of all sorts of things that you could make, like varnish or nail polish or cleaning products. I mean, anything you could think of, they had a formula for how to make it. Now you had to be careful. I haven't actually made any of these things, but it was so fascinating to read through it. Some of them, like some of the makeup, use things that are toxic. So, you know, definitely from a modern perspective, you have to be aware of the things. But it was just so interesting to me to see all of these things that people could just make for themselves and they didn't have to go out and buy. And I don't know, it was just very fascinating. And I love that book so much. I would constantly pore over it. Um, and let's see, in the way of fiction, uh, there was a great book. It was a children's book by Betty Brock, who is best known now. I think No Flying in the House is still in print as a children's book, but she wrote one called The Shades, which was about this magical garden where the shadows were alive. And if you washed your eyes with the water from a fountain, you could see them and interact with them. And it was such a magical book. And I'm really sad that that one has been forgotten because it was really wonderful. I love it.
So those both speak to alchemy and to magic, which is a word that you've used, talking about the area that you live in and kind of uncovering the transformations and the magic in that area. So, where does the term or the name for your newsletter, Industrial Alchemy, come from? What does that mean to you?
Yes. So alchemy, of course, is an art that is ancient, um, and it is a process of taking a base material, as they call it, meaning a less valuable material, breaking it down into all of its constituent parts, refining those parts, and then putting them back together into something that is valuable. And there are many different kinds of alchemy. I mean, everybody knows the turn lead into gold thing. Okay, well, uh, that's probably a metaphor, um, but the process can be used in many different ways. There's emotional and spiritual alchemy, where you break down, uh, you know, your memories and your experiences and analyze them, and then use it to build something new in yourself, a better you. So I chose that to go with industrial because I live in an industrial town in Wheeling, West Virginia. That I mean, it used to be a steel town. It used to be they used to have glass factories. They used to have pottery factories. There were many different industrial things here on the Ohio River, which are no longer here for the most part. So we have sort of these ruins of what was here, and there's been a very long economic contraction here since the 70s, and difficult times for people. Seems to be improving now. It has been for the last 10 years, I'd say. But there's still a lot that can be transformed here. And we can use our past to, and if we understand our past, we can use the pieces of our past to build the new Wheeling, the new life here. And I think that that is applicable to other places. I mean, every place has its past, every place has its things that have been forgotten and that can be sifted through and rebuilt in a new way to make something new. So I think that that process is applicable to many different people and places, as well as on a personal level.
Yeah, we have a similar thing here in Willimantic, Connecticut. It was all built on thread mills, and it was like Thread City, and then all the thread mills left, and now what's left is kind of struggling to go through that same sort of transformation. There's a lot of thread mill buildings along the river that have been more recently transformed into apartment buildings and office buildings, so they are finally starting to get some sort of new life instead of just being, a decaying eyesore. What are some of your favorite transformations that you've seen, either in the houses that you're rebuilding, which we should probably talk about those too, or even just things you've seen, projects you've seen around, the town you live in as things are starting to transform?
Oh man, there's too many to count almost because there's been so much investment and working with a lot of the local companies and as well as projects for school. I've actually had some small part in a number of them. But uh, there we have this huge building. It's Masonic Scottish Rite Temple or Cathedral is what it's called, and it's massive. And I worked on that a fair bit on the facade and replacing some of the terracotta that had been damaged with new pieces, and it has a huge two-headed eagle on the front of it, and I was part of putting the wings back on that thing. And it's like, I don't know, 5 stories up in the air, these huge terracotta wings. But it's such a cool building. There have been so many buildings that have been restored or are in the process of restoration, and Wheeling Actually, I've read that it has the largest stock of Victorian era buildings in the country. And it's largely because Wheeling was very, very rich at that time period. There was a period of time where it was actually the richest city per capita in the United States. Um, so there's a lot of stuff, a lot of things, interesting things got built then. And then in the downturn was bad enough that they mostly made it through the sort of old things are bad, we must build new, because the city didn't have the money to tear things down. So they just sort of got left, which is wonderful because you can always, if you put enough money into it, you can restore something, even if it's really bad. But if it's been torn down, you're out of luck. And that kind of leads me into the house that I'm working on, the one that I started with, which by all rights should have been torn down. It was abandoned for probably 10 years before I got it, and I mean completely abandoned and neglected for I don't know how long before that. Um, I think the last time it had any major work done on it was in the 70s. So I think it's sort of been sliding since then.
And do you know
But
how old it is? Like
it
when it
is
was built?
approximately 1920.
Okay.
Um, and it's not a particularly fancy house, but I got it for essentially nothing. I paid a couple $100 in back taxes and the transfer fee, and that's what I got it for. Um, and I discovered that once I started taking the drywall and the paneling and stuff down that had been put up in later years, all of the original woodwork was still there underneath, pretty much. There's some of it will have to be rebuilt, but most of it was there. And it has a mostly intact staircase with, the fancy newels and, the open staircase, which is pretty. And that is only missing a few pieces. It didn't get all torn apart the way they are in some places. So there are a lot of nice little details in there. Now, I've been working on this for several years. I've had to gut the entire thing because of significant moisture damage to the plaster. None of it was salvageable. And I'm still working on the structural issues. It wasn't terrible, but there were a few things that were pretty major. And those are mostly dealt with. The last major thing is getting a roof on it, which we're under contract, so hopefully that'll be done pretty soon. Um, but it's definitely it's a project that requires vision because anybody who looked at this house would have said tear the thing down. And I mean that's how I got it for free essentially because it belonged to a friend of mine. He had picked it up at a tax sale. And then when he was moving out of town, he was trying to sell all of his properties. He couldn't sell this one. It does need significant work. And so basically any amount to pay for it would have been too much. Um, but, I just, after walking through it, I saw the potential and I kind of fell in love with it, which is dangerous. But um, I saw the potential. I really loved how it was laid out. It's not a big house, but it's very nice. It can be very nice in the future. In my head, it will be very nice. Um, so it's a very long process getting there, though, and I just have to keep reminding myself of that vision because when you're down in the weeds, it can be hard to remember why you're doing this.
And what is your long-term vision? Are you looking to restore it to like a Victorian era vibe, or are you going more modern? And then are you hoping to move into it? Or are you hoping to basically do a really long flip and sell it? What are your goals for it?
Um, it's it's actually a little bit later than the Victorian age, so it would be closer to a craftsman sort of style, although it is not actually. It's not really any particular style. It's just a oh, what do they call it? I've forgotten the word, but just sort of the native style at the time. Um, but it has a few nice details, and I want to get all of those details brought back out. And um, I am open to options as far as what to do with it. I don't know if I will be moving into it myself, but I have 3 children and they're getting older. So it's possible that one of them, if they wish to stick around in the area, will live there. It's also possible that for a time I may have it as art studios is something that I had considered doing with it because it has nice big rooms. Um, and the it wouldn't be like rent an art studio to an artist on a monthly basis sort of thing. Nobody around here has the money for that. Just a moment. Sorry. But I was thinking more of a space that you could rent out, like for people who need a few days to finish up a big project, or a week at a time, or things like that. It'd be a space to rent in a short-term way to work on art projects. Sorry, and or there's even a small room that could be a an office for like writing or something.
That sounds awesome. I love that idea. So it kind of a collaborative, almost uh yeah, WeWork kind of isn't the greatest example anymore, but that sort of space where you can rent out some room. And then are the rooms big enough that there could even be like someone could rent it out to run a class in that, like a smaller class in that space?
Yes, the downstairs living room would be big enough to have a small class in, and it's got pocket doors to close it off from the rest of the house. So yes, I see that the first floor is being sort of the first phase in that of having the larger meeting room. The kitchen would be like the office sort of area, and then the dining room would be like a common room where people could hang out and chat if they're not working, just a community space sort of. Um, and then work my way up to the second floor, and there's the 2 larger bedrooms, which could be studio spaces, and the small bedroom, which could be a small writing office. So yeah, that's my vision right now.
That would be awesome. I love that. That's one of the things that we love to do is kind of build those community spaces where people can come together and share ideas and have sort of that third place is the term that I've heard it referred to. So you've got home and then work or school, and then your third place is that other community place that you go to, whether it's the local coffee shop or for us we built Quester's Way,
Mhm.
or the dojo, or an art space like that sounds like a fabulous third place where people can come together and share ideas and inspiration, and that sounds beautiful. I love it. Cool. All right. So I have some not so rapid fire questions for you for the end. I have to figure out something to call them other than rapid fire because they're shorter answered questions, but not super rapid. So my first question for you would be, what should people look for in someone who does what you do? So if someone's looking to find someone to come in and transform their space in some way, how would you find someone who does what you do?
I think the biggest thing to look for is that they have enthusiasm for the same thing that you have enthusiasm for. Um, this is something that I can bring from my contractor days, and I think it's applicable to a lot of different situations like this. If in an old building, if you have somebody come in and they're like, "Ah, oh, these old buildings, you just need to tear off the box gutters and throw up drywall," and they hate old buildings. You don't want them working on your historic house. You want somebody who's enthusiastic and sees your vision and is going to work towards your vision. So I think that applies to any sort of transformation that you want. When you talk to somebody who's going to help you reach your goal, you want them to be enthusiastic about the same things that you are, and that they will help you go in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah, I could see the same thing looking at someone who's more of like a nutrition or a fitness coach. You know, if you're looking to for them to help you create a transformation within your body composition, it needs to be in a way that aligns with your, who you are nutritionally. So like I worked with a nutrition coach and it ended up not being a good fit because I'm a vegetarian and he's not an expert in that. And he was good at his job and said after that first initial time, like, I'm probably not the right person for you because I don't have the expertise that's needed. So, someone that's honest about being passionate about the same things that you're passionate with, that's awesome. So, now, what's one thing that you could suggest to our listeners that they could apply in their life today? So this could be about really anything. But what's something in the realm of transformation, some little nugget that people could take with them to help a transformation today in their lives?
Okay. Well, I would say that in order to change, you have to change something, right? You can't keep doing the same thing that you've been doing and expect to be able to change, right? So if you wish to change something, then I would say go find some resource in that area, whatever it is you're looking to transform, and look for something that you've never looked at before, some new way of looking at it. And it may not be the right way for you, but it will at least give you another perspective and help you figure out what the right way is. So look for the weird things that you haven't looked at before.
Yeah, that reminds me of like that technique of for like drawing where you turn it upside down if you're trying
Oh,
to like copy something over. So just giving yourself that new perspective that's gonna kind of scramble your brain a little bit from the way
absolutely.
yeah, the way you usually think. All right, and then what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned through your entrepreneurial teaching journey?
Um,
Or one of them? I know the most is hard.
Persistence. You know, there's going to be days where you don't want to do the thing, and maybe you don't do whatever the thing is, but as long as you keep showing up and keep working at it, you do make progress. And, you know, you never give up. It's never over until you've fully given up, right? As long as you keep trying, you can make progress, you can get there in the end, hopefully. But it's useful to look back and realize, even if you didn't feel like you were getting as much work done on something as you thought you were, but if you look back over the year, you can say, oh, well, I did all of this. I went from point A to point B, and it was a lot of little steps, but they add up in the end.
Yeah,
So
that is,
persistent
yeah.
feedback.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Persistence and feedback. I like that. And I think there's a piece of recording too. Like you're recording a lot of your progress in what you share on your YouTube video with the restoration of the old house, which means if you get down on yourself, you can go back and look at how it looked a year ago. You have video evidence of all the progress that you've made. So and then speaking of your YouTube channel, my final question for you is how can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I have a weekly newsletter, which you can find at, well, probably the easiest way to find it would be to go to my YouTube channel, actually, which is at Industrial Alchemy. But the AL is only done one time. So INDUSTRALCHEMY. So the AL at the end of industrial and at the beginning of alchemy get smashed together. So from there, in the description of all of my videos, I have links to where you can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out on a weekly basis. And I also, if you just search for Mel Jeffcoat podcast on your podcast place of choice, although not Apple at the moment because for some reason I can't make an Apple ID, but any of the others, you'll find it. And I do that. Well, the goal is every day. I did it every day in September. Had a little bit of a hiatus here, but now I'm back to doing it every day.
Yeah, no, and I am an avid reader and listener of both of your newsletter and your podcast, and I love your storytelling, especially in the podcast. There was one that like about kind of premonitions, I think, or just like energy, the story about the dog.
Mhm.
It was just I it's funny, it's one of those things where the details in my memory are blurry, but I remember the feeling and like I know exactly where I was in the car. It's like it hit the climax of the story, like I know where I was on the road. That was just it was You are a fabulous storyteller. So I really appreciate your podcast, and I would recommend it as a nice gentle listen. I've told you before, I love the tone of your voice, the rhythm of the way you speak. Just is really kind of soothing and calming to listen to. So that combined with the storytelling is fabulous. So thank you for doing this with me today, and of course, keep being you because you're doing wonderful things in the world.
Thanks so much for the time, Stephanie. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. I will see you soon.